the avant-garde of the 1920s and the deconstructivism of today, the logic of inheritance. Avant-garde lat 20 współczesny deconstructivism, logika dziedzictwa. Presentation will be made by Professor Julija Ivashko. The floor is yours.
Dzień dobry, szanowni państwo. Najpierw bardzo dziękuję organizatorom.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First, let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me here and for displaying the materials, screening the materials about the war in Ukraine during the break. For Ukraine, it is so important to have this warm support, to have the manifestation of support, even more so that with the exception of this press officer, all the people who were shown in this film, they were killed in the war. They're no longer with us, but they still live. They still live in this film. They live among their parents and their compatriots, and I thank you very much with all my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, let me move on to my presentation now. This presentation was prepared by my co-authors from Poltava, Politechnik, and the other co-author, she lives in Kharkiv. And actually, Kharkiv is indeed the second center of avant-garde, and I deeply regret that Kharkiv has been so much destroyed, and now we have to work on rebuilding and reconstructing the avant-garde monument.
About the revival of the phenomena of the avant-garde. That is, the active processing and rethinking of contemporary ideas in the projects of architects of the late 20th, early 21st centuries. Primarily in the project of Western deconstructivist architects, postmodernists, and the latest supporters of digital architecture. The paradox is that the work of Soviet architects of the avant-garde and constructivism is actively studied by practicing architects and scientists around the world, but remains unicid in the post-Soviet space, where these projects are considered only as a fact of history. That's why we consider it expedient not to transform the phenomena of the Soviet avant-garde only into a phenomenon in the history of architecture, but instead to analyze it from the standpoint of modernity and in a continuous connection with the constructivism and digital architecture of the late 20th, early 21st centuries. From the point of view, the Ukrainian heritage also has a unique and important significance. It is worth nothing that the awareness of the creativity of avant-garde architects in the Soviet Union was different from this awareness in modern science of Western Europe and the USA, as it weakly traces the international connections of these phenomena and didn't single out the Ukrainian phenomena as a special phenomenon. In addition, a few researchers emphasize the phenomena of the formation of a special artistic language of the avant-garde, which, as we will show below, was developed by subsequent currents. Ideological motives of the avant-garde. The development of the avant-garde of the 1920s is related to the rationalism of the 20th century and the manifestation of this style in the architecture and art of the Soviet Union chronologically coincided with similar phenomena in Europe, primarily with the activeness of such well-known European associations as De Stijl in Holland, the Frankfurt Group, Bauhaus in Germany, and L'Esprit Nouveau in France. It can be argued that the main task of the avant-garde was to break the continuity with the past and create fundamentally new criteria for aesthetic evaluation and new means of artistic expression. This was manifested in the desire to find new expressive means of the architectural language, which was based not on historical styles and classical methods of composition, but on universal abstract forms. The purity of archaeological morphology was intended to express the absolute global values and laws of the universe. It was assumed that the ideas of revolution and the concept of communist construction are the very universal essences that need to be expressed in an architectural message. Based on this concept, architects resolutely denied stylistic decor, instead paid great attention to the beauty of pure dynamic form, and actively used new compositional means, materials, structural schemes, which we see, for example, in the first house of Dr. in Kyiv and the building of Desprom in Kharkiv. How to? Як? Ага. Так, то in Kyiv, а то in Kharkiv. No nie wiem, w jakim teraz stanie, no mam nadzieję, że nie zburzona.
In what condition this building is right now. I hope it survives.
Vividly then, in the realized space of architecture, this style manifested itself in modern art, which in many cases turns into a synthesis of art and geometry. For example, it is quite difficult to clearly determine what the unrealized projects, so-called proms, of the Soviet artist L. Lisitsky are actually projects of works of art since from the very beginning of the idea they were impossible for practical implementation, since perspective images that express spatial relations replaced by axonometry, which is combined with planar images. L. Lisitsky's drawings were not intended for implementation, especially architectural ones. Even the architectural fantasies of Yakov Chernykhov, which are very similar to the projects, were not intended for construction. They were supposed to express the long-term goal of the new communist system, avant-garde and the modernity. Deconstructivism as a direction of modern architecture was formed at the end of the 1980s in the work of Eisman, Meir, Hadid, Trumi, Kolas, Libeskind, and others, and was founded on the one hand through a discussion with Soviet constructivism in the 1920s, and from the second on the ideas put forward by the French philosopher Jacques Derrida, who argued that architecture enters into conflict, debunks, and denies itself. Jacques Derrida is the author of the term deconstructivism, which gave the name to the whole direction in modern architecture, art, philosophy, and even in literature to define such a way of interpreting a work when a conflict is artificially created between the content of the text and its interpretation. Derrida himself defined constructivism not as a new style, but as a new method of thinking that was reflected in architecture. And this is very important. In the title itself, the prefix de emphasizes its deconstruction meaning in relation to constructivism. In contrast to the traditional approach, when already built objects are opposed to new ones, and conflict is created between the content familiar to a person and what is new that he sees. Since architecture is always a kind of text, we see some similar things in deconstructivism, which was formed as an independent movement in the late 1980s. Deconstructivism emphasized in its theoretical basis the potential of architecture as a specific means of reflection and perception, which comes into conflict with the surrounding environment and its own structure. The source of inspiration for deconstructivism is different periods and different representatives of Soviet constructivism and the avant-garde. For example, Rem Koolhaas and Zaha Hadid were inspired by late constructivism, and especially the anti-gravity architecture in Ivan Leonidov. Other authors prefer the legacy of Ladovsky, Malevich, Kandinsky, Vesnin, one Vesnin and another two brothers. For example, Zaha Hadid, in her project of the Maxi Museum in Rome, was inspired by the idea of expressing the movement of the visitor in the surrounding space of the city and then in the museum itself. There's the National Museum of Modern Art in Rome. That's a photo by Alena Remizova, my co-author. Jacques Derrida gave his evaluation to architectural projects, as he did in the case of the competition project of the master plan of La Villette Park in Paris, architect Bernard Tschumi. Bernard Tschumi himself said that this is the first deconstructivist project implemented in the world. In 1988, in the journal Architectural Design, he wrote that the Parc La Villette project had a specific purpose to prove that it was possible to construct a complex architectural organization without recourse to traditional rules of composition, hierarchy, and order. The principle of superimposition of three autonomous systems of points, lines, and surfaces was developed through the rejection of the general synthesis of objective constraints, evident in most large-scale projects. In fact, if historically architecture has always been defined as a harmonic synthesis of value, structure, utility, and formal constraints, Venestas, Firmitas, Utilitas, then the park has become architecture in spite of itself. It is disintegration. In this discussion, Bernard Tschumi introduces a large number of new concepts and ideas that reveal deconstructivism. At first glance, the words deconstructing, disjunction, disassociation, disruption, discontinue, discard, dismount, displacement, distortion seem always synonymous. But upon closer examination, we are convinced that behind them a wealth of shades of understanding of decompositional thinking is revealed. And there are not just words, there are ideas about the procedures of compositional work. A feature of the La Villette Park project is a network of light one- and two-story pavilions, folies, metallic structures brightly painted in red. That's only photo by my co-author Alena Remizova, 2007, Park La Villette Folia. Which compositions are based on the destruction of the archetypal forms of the cube, cylinder, sphere, etc., which allude to the research works of both Soviet constructivists and Bauhaus masters, Konstantin Malevich, Yakov Chernikov, Walter Gropius, Paul Klee, Johannes Itten, etc. In this way, Tschumi creates a system of things, a special semiotic codes that allows the visitor to navigate in the park. Evaluating this project, the winner of the international competition, Derrida, emphasized that the folies pavilions brought the impression of dynamics and mobility to the overall composition. They destabilize the content, rewrite and update the architecture, and revive the energy. The abstractness of the form ensures its ambiguous reading. In Red Follies, someone will read the symbol of slaughtered animals. This place used to be a slaughterhouse, and someone will see a simple roller coaster or an exhibition pavilion, and someone will see the frame of space. Thus, Parc La Villette is the text composed with the help of elementary symbolic forms. Dots, follies, lines, alleys, and canals, plains, lawns, and gardens. The appearance of these things is certainly connected with the analytical search for the avant-garde, but it leads us to the creation of a new lexicon, Umberto Eco's term, of deconstructivism. In addition, the very analytical methods of thinking of the avant-garde and constructivists was developed by deconstructivists and postmodernists. The ideas of deconstructivism found their continuation and expression in the large buildings of La Villette Park, in particular in the City of Music, architect Christian de Portslam Park, where the triangular volume is covered with a sloping roof and is cut in different directions along the movement of visitors. Also, the La Jot's spherical cinema with a hemispherical screen, which creates the effect of total presence, has a mirror coating that reflects the sky and clouds, thus dematerializing a sphere with a diameter of 36 meters. That's also photo by Alena Remezova in 2007. Deconstructivism demonstrates new technical possibilities that were previously unavailable. Digital technologies have paved the way for the realization of these ideas. A world-renowned architect Jean Nouvel continues this trend in the building of the new Philharmonie de Paris next to the City of Music in Parc La Villette. Flexible surfaces, complex in their body geometry, the combination of movement and space which violate our traditional ideas about tectonics, become possible thanks to modern digital design technology. We see that the lexical code is radically changing, but the deconstruction technique continues to develop. The paradox is that, despite the declared difference in creative use, the compositional means of deconstructivists and postmodernists are similar, which is noticeable, for example, in a 7-story building built in Berlin according to the project of one of the postmodernism leading master, Aldo Rossi. That will be the photo by Alexander Socha, 2016. This building clothed the perspective of interesting streets with its angular volume. The method of active corner trimming in combination with the cylinder used by Rossi was first used by the outstanding constructivist Golosov in the building of the Zuev Workers Club on Lesnaya Street in Moscow, as well as in numerous constructivist buildings in Kharkiv, such as the Builders Club, the General Post Office, and the building of automatic telephone exchange. Also, Aldo Rossi may not have known the constructivist monuments of Kharkiv. The principle of dialogue with constructivism can be traced in postmodernism as well. Conclusions. Deconstructivism grew out of the avant-garde and constructivism of the 1920s. It also rose as a protest, but already against the integrity of the aesthetic forms of modernism, which dictated its strict principles of monologue of the only possible point of view. Deconstructivism contrasts the meager rationality of modernism with an open emotional dialogue with the past of a specific era, avant-garde, and an expressive symbolic system. This principle of dialogic conversation was later spread to polylogy with different eras, which became the basis for the development of the language of postmodernism. The lexicon of avant-garde and constructivism was developed not only by deconstructivism, but also by digital architecture, transforming archetypes towards their complication, exaggeration, and tectonic ambiguity. However, this is a topic for a separate article. So, one protest trend gave birth to another after many decades, became a creative experiment embodied in the works of world masters of architecture who were not afraid to experiment with form. Also, deconstructivism has not become the dominant style. It has formed a rich palette of compositional techniques that has become widespread in the professional fields of both postmodernism and digital architecture. Dziękuję bardzo za uwagę.